Waitress kicked out of Pope's inauguration. What she does next shocks the world. She wasn't on the guest list. She had no press pass, no title, no special robes. Just a waitress uniform, a crumpled train ticket, and a photo of her dead father shaking hands with the man who would become Pope. Everyone told her not to go. But Clara Benedetti wasn't the type to wait for permission. What happened next would ripple through the world. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The smell of fried onions clung to Clara's apron as she ducked beneath the order window of Trattoria Lucia, balancing 2 steaming plates on her arm. Her sneakers squeaked on the cracked linoleum floor as she maneuvered between tables packed with hungry locals and half-listening tourists. "Clara, table 6 is still waiting," barked the manager. "I'm going," she called over her shoulder, plastering on a tired smile. Naples was loud. Always loud. Traffic screamed through the narrow streets outside. Espresso machines hissed from every corner cafe, and everyone had something to say. But inside Clara's head, it was quiet, filled only with one thought. Tomorrow, I leave for Rome. She could barely believe it herself. That morning, after clearing dishes and wiping down menus, she had finally done it. Pulled out the small envelope from the shoebox beneath her bed. Inside was a crumpled second-class train ticket. Napoli Centrale to Roma Termini. Departure, 5:42 a.m. Cost, nearly everything she had. "Are you really doing this?" asked Lucia, the older cook, as they both stood outside on break, smoking beside a crate of tomatoes. Clara nodded. "He came to our soup kitchen, you remember? Before he was famous. Before anyone cared. He held my father's hand while he died." Lucia's eyes softened. "But it's the Pope's inauguration, Clara. There'll be thousands there. You really think he'll see you?" Clara shrugged. "I don't need him to see me. I just need to see him. Just once." She didn't say it out loud, but the truth ran deeper. That moment with the future Pope was the last time her father looked at peace. After her shift ended, Clara walked the long road home, a tiny 2-room apartment she shared with her mother, whose once fiery spirit had been dimmed by grief and illness. As her mother slept, Clara sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in her lap. She carefully pulled out a folded photograph. It was faded, but still clear. Her father, thin and sick, sitting on a bench beside a humble man in simple robes. They were holding hands, smiling. He wasn't a cardinal back then, she thought. Just a priest who didn't look away. The air was electric. Buses packed with pilgrims arrived in waves. Flags fluttered. Voices chanted and sang. St. Peter's Square overflowed with color, movement, prayer. Clara stood at the edge of it all, eyes wide. She clutched her satchel tightly to her chest, inside it the photo, her notebook, and a small bottle of water. "I made it, Papa," she whispered. Security lines snaked through the square. Large monitors flickered to life, showing glimpses of the inauguration about to begin. As Clara stepped forward, trying to inch closer for a view, a hand stopped her. "Pass, please?" asked a tall guard, his accent crisp. Clara smiled nervously. "I don't have a pass, but, look, this is him. With my father. I just want to stand here and watch." The guard frowned, barely glancing at the photo. "This area is for reserved guests. Step back." "I'm not going inside, I swear. Just the edge. I came all the way from," I said, "step back." He raised his voice. People nearby turned to look. Clara's cheeks flushed. Another guard joined. "Problem?" "She doesn't belong here," the first one said. Clara took a step back, but they advanced. "I'm leaving, I promise," she stammered, stumbling on the curb. And then, it happened. The crowd shifted. Clara tripped, fell hard on the cobblestones. Her satchel burst open. Papers scattered. The photo landed face up on the pavement. Laughter. Whispers. One of the guards muttered, "Should have stayed home, sweetheart." Humiliated, Clara scrambled to gather her things, her knee scraped and bleeding. No one offered a hand. She stood up slowly, eyes burning, clutching the photo to her chest as the inauguration bells rang out above. She had come to honor a memory, and was treated like trash. With tears streaking her cheeks, Clara turned her back on the Vatican and walked away, into the winding Roman streets, into the blur of crowds, until the dome of St. Peter's was just a silhouette behind her. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to change the world. Clara didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to move. The crowd behind her was still cheering. Trumpets blared, Bells rang out from the Vatican towers, and somewhere in that sea of celebration, the new pope was giving his first public blessing. Clara should have been inspired. Instead, she felt invisible. She limped down a side alley, past souvenir shops selling plastic rosaries and overpriced gelato. Her satchel hung loosely from her shoulder, the zipper torn from her fall. She clutched the photo tightly, thumb brushing the face of her father. Dirt smudged the edges, but the moment it captured still glowed. That man saved your dignity once, she thought bitterly. But his people just took it away. She found herself near a fountain, not a famous one, not the kind printed on postcards, just a quiet corner of the city where the cobblestones glistened with morning mist and pigeons strutted like they owned the world. She sank onto the fountain's edge and finally let herself cry. At first, they were silent tears, the kind she had trained herself to cry as a child, when her mother was too sick and her father too tired to comfort her. But soon they turned into choked sobs that shook her entire chest. A family nearby glanced her way. The mother whispered something in Italian to her children, and they turned away. Even here, Clara thought, people look away when you're in pain. She wiped her eyes and took a deep, shaky breath. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook. Its cover was bent, the corners softened by time. She opened to a blank page. For a long moment, she just stared at it. And then, with trembling hands, she began to write. To the man who once saw my father, and the world that didn't see me today. The words came like a storm. Clara didn't write with elegance, not the polished kind. But her honesty was its own form of beauty. Her words carried the raw ache of being dismissed, the quiet courage of hope, and the burning question in her heart. Why are the poor always the first to be pushed aside, even in a place built for grace? She wrote about standing in line for communion as a child, wearing secondhand shoes and hoping no one noticed. About watching her father give his last slice of bread to a stranger. About the day that humble priest came to the soup kitchen and sat with them. No cameras, no microphones, just kindness. And how that same church had thrown her out today like she was nothing. She ended the letter with a line she didn't plan, but once it spilled out, it felt right. You taught me to believe in the power of the unseen. But today, I was unseen, and I'm not sure I believe anymore. She signed it only with her first name, Clara. No last name. No plea for attention. Just truth. A breeze stirred the pages as she closed the notebook. Her tears had stopped. There was no more sadness now, just emptiness. A man nearby, a tourist with a DSLR camera, glanced at her. You okay? He asked in English. Clara nodded. I wrote something. Don't know why. He smiled kindly. That's sometimes the best kind of writing. She hesitated, then opened her phone. With fingers still sore from the fall, she typed out the letter, word for word. Then she logged into her old blog, the one she hadn't touched in over a year, and posted it. Title: A letter from the fountain. She didn't tag it. Didn't share the link. Didn't even know if anyone still followed the blog. It was just a way to breathe again. When she hit publish, the screen flickered once, and then it was gone, floating into the void of the internet. Clara looked around. The square was quiet here. No one cheered. No one sang. Just the faint drip of the fountain behind her and the distant toll of the Vatican bells. She stood, dusted off her coat, and began walking to the station. Back to Naples. Back to the restaurant. Back to a life where the world didn't notice her. The train back to Naples was almost empty. Clara sat by the window, her reflection staring back at her, tired, bruised, and disappointed. The Roman skyline slowly disappeared behind her, swallowed by fields and hills, as if trying to erase the morning's humiliation. The conductor passed by. Ticket. She handed it over without a word. When he moved on, she pulled out the photo again, her father and the man who was now the Pope, captured in a quiet, forgotten moment. Was it worth it? She whispered to the image. The photo didn't answer. Back home, life carried on exactly as it always had, like nothing had happened. Lucia in the kitchen, her mother dozing off in front of the tiny TV. The restaurant buzzing with tourists asking for carbonara and Instagram-perfect espresso. No one had read the letter. No one had seen the post. And that was fine. That was what Clara had expected. You didn't miss much, she told Lucia when she asked. Just crowds and security. I didn't even get close. Lucia gave her a sympathetic smile. Still proud of you for going. Clara nodded, but didn't feel proud. She worked the late shift that night, pouring wine, clearing plates, listening to drunken laughter echo off the walls. At one point, a customer clicked his fingers to get her attention, like she was furniture. She smiled through it. She was used to that. She went home exhausted. Her knee still ached from the fall. She didn't check her blog. She didn't check her phone. The next day was the same. And the day after that. Days passed. The world didn't change. But something inside Clara did. She had done something different this time. She had spoken. Out loud. For herself. She wasn't sure what that meant yet. But she knew it mattered. She began scribbling little notes during her breaks. Things she wished someone would say to her, or about her. You are not the background of someone else's story. God doesn't require credentials. Grace can wear sneakers and smell like onions. She started pinning them to the inside of her locker. Quiet truths. Just for her. At night, she'd sometimes sit beside her mother, stroking her hair as she slept. Her mother didn't ask how the trip went. Maybe she didn't remember. Maybe she didn't want to know. Clara didn't bring it up either. But something inside her was settling. She'd gone to Rome expecting closure. She came back with something better, clarity. She was still invisible to the world. But she wasn't invisible to herself anymore. And that, somehow, felt like the beginning of something. 3 days after Clara posted the letter, the internet found her. She was restocking napkins in the back of the Trattoria when Lucia burst into the kitchen, red-faced and panting, waving her cracked phone. Clara, she shouted. Santa Maria, Clara, it's you. Clara looked up, confused. What's me? Lucia shoved the phone in her face. On the screen was a Twitter post, thousands of likes, shares, comments, a screenshot of her letter under the caption, "A waitress was kicked out of the Pope's inauguration." She wrote this. I'm crying. Clara stared at it. It didn't feel real. The font was hers. The title was hers. But that number? 17,402 retweets? That couldn't be hers. Lucia scrolled fast. They're calling it the fountain letter. There's a priest in New York quoting it in sermons. There's a nun in Brazil who made it into a song. You're everywhere. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came. Another notification buzzed. Then another. Her old blog, long forgotten, had hundreds of comments. Emails poured in. Journalists, influencers, activists, and the most surreal of all, a message from a Vatican media representative with a blue check mark. Would you be open to discussing your letter for an official response? She sat down slowly. Her hands trembled. I don't understand, she whispered. Why now? Lucia smiled. Because you wrote the truth. And the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. By nightfall, Clara's name was trending in half a dozen languages. News anchors debated whether the church owed her an apology. Some called her a modern Joan of Arc. Others simply called her the waitress who broke the internet. But Clara didn't feel powerful. She felt terrified. Reporters stood outside the restaurant by morning. They pushed microphones in her face. They begged for interviews. Clara, how did it feel to be kicked out by the Pope's own guards? Did you write the letter hoping to go viral? What would you say to the Vatican now, if you had their attention? She said nothing. Lucia stepped in front of her. Leave her alone. She's not a politician. She's a girl who wrote from her heart. They didn't listen. That night, Clara shut off her phone and curled up beside her mother. She needed stillness. The noise outside couldn't drown out the fear rising in her chest. She hadn't wanted fame. She just wanted to be seen. But the world wouldn't let go. An editor from a major newspaper called and offered to fly her to Rome, first class. A bishop from Argentina sent a handwritten note praising her bravery. A popular talk show host asked if she'd appear on live TV with the caption, "The Waitress versus the Vatican." But the strangest message came from someone unexpected. His name was Francesco Lucari, and he claimed to have been an aide to the Pope, the same man in Clara's photo. His email was simple. The Holy Father saw your letter. He wept. He asked if you might come back to Rome, not to explain yourself, but to be heard. Clara read it 5 times before she believed it was real. Then she dropped her phone. Lucia was the first to speak when Clara showed her the message. Well, she said, I think it's time you packed your bag again. Clara swallowed hard. But I'm just a waitress. No, Lucia replied. You're a voice. And 1,000 people just realized it. Clara turned to her mother. She was sitting at the table, silent, fragile. Her eyes, however, looked brighter than they had in days. Your father would be proud, she whispered. Clara smiled softly. He'd probably say I made too much noise. Her mother chuckled. He'd be right. But it's good noise. 2 days later, Clara stood in Roma Termini once more. This time, she wore no apron, no cracked sneakers, just a modest white dress borrowed from Lucia and a satchel, not to carry menus, but the same notebook, the same photo, and the same hope. But everything felt different. The station was no longer a portal to shame. It was a bridge to something new. As the train pulled into the platform, she caught her reflection again in the window. And this time, she didn't look away. By the time she arrived in Rome, her inbox had exploded again. A feature article titled "The Girl with the Letter" was now the top story on 3 international news sites. Someone had animated her letter into a short film. University students in Canada were organizing a panel discussion about faith and dignity because of her. She sat at a small cafe near the Vatican gates, waiting for a car arranged by the Pope's aide. Her heart pounded. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew what she wasn't going to do: shrink. She wouldn't apologize for being the girl in the back row, the waitress with the bad table shifts and the bruised knee, the daughter of a man who died in kindness and a mother who never stopped believing in grace. The car pulled up, a black Mercedes. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her. "Miss Clara Benedetti?" She nodded. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Yes, that's me." And as she stepped inside, the cameras clicked again, but this time, she didn't hide. The girl the world had ignored had finally been heard. And Rome was listening. The Vatican gates were unlike anything Clara had ever stood before. Iron filigree wound upward like vines into the sky. The guards, still dressed in their bright ceremonial uniforms, stood stiff and unreadable. But this time, no one reached for her shoulder. No one shoved her aside. A man in a long black cassock stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Miss Benedetti?" She nodded. Her throat was dry. "I'm Monsignor Lucari. Please follow me. His Holiness is expecting you." The words hit her like a whisper across water. "His Holiness is expecting you." The same hands that had once baked pastries for tourists were now trembling behind her back. They moved through a series of cool marble hallways, past mosaics and candlelit alcoves. Clara's footsteps echoed beside Lucari's. It felt like walking through a dream or a very vivid reckoning. At the final corridor, Lucari paused. He gestured toward a wooden door, grand yet simple. "He's inside. You may go in alone." Clara blinked. "Alone?" Lucari gave her a soft smile. "He asked for it. He wants to speak with the woman, not the headlines." She hesitated for half a second. Then she stepped forward and opened the door. The room was not what she expected. No throne, no choir, no crowd. Just a small sitting room with golden sunlight pouring in through the stained glass windows. And in the center of it, seated beside a modest table, was the Pope. Older now, his back slightly curved, but his eyes were warm and piercingly clear. Clara stood frozen. He looked up, set down his tea, and smiled gently. "Miss Benedetti," he said, "you look just like your father." The words struck her harder than any headline. She took a shaky step forward. You knew him?" The Pope nodded. "Once. Long ago. He was a good man. Quiet. Thoughtful. He gave without asking. The kind of soul that left fingerprints on your spirit." Clara's eyes brimmed. "He died in a kitchen, carrying someone else's soup." "And heaven," the Pope replied, "was better the moment he arrived." She sat across from him, stunned. "How?" she asked. "How did you remember him?" "That photo. He was in your class, wasn't he?" The Pope nodded. "Yes. Seminary. Decades ago. Before the titles. Before the rituals. When we were just 2 boys who believed the world could be better." Clara clutched the photo from her bag, slid it across the table. "You looked happy," she said softly. "He kept this with him always. Even when we had nothing." The Pope studied it for a long time. His hands trembled. "I hadn't seen this in so many years," he whispered. "When I saw your letter, it was like being pulled backward into the one place I try not to visit, my own regrets." Clara sat silently. He continued. "I chose a path. The church. The robes. The politics. He chose a daughter. A humble life. I thought I was walking toward greatness, but he walked toward grace." The Pope looked up. His voice cracked. "Your words, Clara, they cut through 1,000 walls I've built around myself. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you at the inauguration. I'm sorry the gates closed on you. But most of all, I'm sorry that it took shame for your truth to be heard." Clara shook her head. "I wasn't asking to be praised. I just wanted to tell my story. I didn't think anyone would care. Then you've done something even rarer, the Pope replied. You made the world care. A long silence passed between them. The Pope reached for a small wooden box beside him. He opened it and gently pulled out a folded cloth. Your father gave this to me the day he left seminary. I never told anyone I kept it, not even the cardinals. He unfolded the cloth, a faded kitchen towel embroidered with a single line of threadbare Latin, Servire est regner. To serve is to reign. Clara touched it delicately, her breath caught. He never told me that, she whispered. The Pope smiled. He didn't need to. He lived it. They talked for hours. About Naples. About her mother. About the hundreds of people who had written in after reading her letter, waitresses, nurses, janitors, even priests, saying they'd never felt so seen. When she finally stood to leave, the Pope reached across the table and took her hand. You reminded the world that holiness is not found behind velvet ropes. It lives in everyday dignity. You reminded me. Clara looked into his eyes, not with awe, but with quiet resolve. I wasn't trying to change the world, she said. I just wanted to matter. You do, he replied. Then he placed the kitchen towel in her hands. He would want you to have this. Clara held it close, as if it were a sacred text. Outside, the cameras waited. But this time, she walked out not as a scandal or a symbol, but as a daughter. A girl who had once knelt beside a fountain and whispered words to a God she wasn't sure could hear her. And now, the whole world was listening. The Vatican Square had never been this full, not even on Easter. Clara stood in the wings of the balcony behind thick velvet curtains, heart racing. The kitchen towel her father had given the Pope still clutched in her hands. The roar of the crowd below was overwhelming. A sea of thousands, maybe more, chanting, singing, praying. Some held signs that read, I am Clara. Others simply stood in reverent silence, waiting. Beside her, Monsignor Lucari adjusted his glasses and murmured, the world expects a statement. But His Holiness, he's chosen a story. The balcony doors opened. The Pope stepped forward, his white robes catching the sunlight like sails on water. For a moment, he just stood there, eyes closed, letting the breeze touch his face. Then he raised a hand for silence. The crowd stilled. He spoke without a script. His voice was old, but steady, cracked by age and emotion. There was a girl once, he began, who tried to enter this square with nothing but a photo and hope. And we turned her away. Clara froze. Every heartbeat thudded in her chest like thunder. We saw her clothes, not her courage. Her silence, not her soul. And for that, we owe not only an apology, but a change. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Today, I tell you this. Holiness does not belong to robes, or titles, or locked gates. Holiness is in the hands that serve, in the daughters who carry on after fathers fall, in the voices we've ignored for too long. Then, with visible effort, he reached beside him and lifted something high. The kitchen towel. Her father gave me this, a token of humble faith. It says, Servire est regner. To serve is to reign. And from this day forward, let the Church never again confuse grandeur for grace. The crowd erupted. Tears. Applause. Shouts of brava, Clara, carried through the square like a wave. But he wasn't finished. Let the square, from this day on, remain open. The farthest seats shall be the first to be seen. The lowest voices shall be the first to be heard. And then, something no one expected. He turned, looked directly at Clara behind the curtain, and extended his hand. She hesitated. The cameras were all waiting. She wasn't wearing anything special. Her palms were sweating. She was just Clara. But she stepped forward. The curtains parted. And suddenly, the girl once shoved out by guards stood beside the Pope on the world's holiest balcony. In sneakers, with tears in her eyes and courage in her bones. No titles. No speeches. Just a symbol. The waitress who'd once been locked out was now the face of change. In the weeks that followed, the world didn't stop talking. Churches held open-mic confessionals where the poor could share their pain. Articles called Clara's moment the Vatican's Second Reformation. Movement spread, #Open the Gates trended for days. Lucia framed the newspaper front page and hung it in the Trattoria. Clara's mother cried when she saw it. Not because you're famous, she said, but because you never stopped being kind. Clara never called herself a hero. She returned to Naples, kept working at the Trattoria part-time, and continued writing. But everything had changed. Now, when she wrote, the world leaned in. not because of scandal, but because her story had opened a gate much bigger than the one at the Vatican. It had opened hearts. 3 months had passed. The Vatican Square was no longer just a tourist site. It had become a symbol, not of marble and grandeur, but of access, inclusion. Clara's story had stirred something sacred that no decree ever could, the awakening of dignity in the forgotten. Yet Clara herself remained quiet. No talk shows, no book deals, no fashion endorsements, even though offers poured in. She kept her job at Trattoria Lucia, now busier than ever. Tourists visited not just for the pasta, but for her. People waited hours to sit at her section, just to ask her what it felt like. And always, she answered the same way. More important than how it felt is what we do with it next. She didn't chase influence. She redirected it. Helped sponsor kitchen apprenticeships for young girls from the local shelter. Organized food drives every Sunday. And on her evenings off, she still visited the basilica not to be seen, but to listen. That was Clara. Always watching. Always listening. Until one quiet Tuesday morning, when she received an envelope marked with the seal of the Vatican. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Clara, I've asked for this to reach you privately. My health is declining, and soon I may no longer speak from the balcony. But I've seen what your voice can do. I want you to lead something new, a council of the unheard. A table where janitors, waitresses, refugees, and street cleaners can advise those who shape the church's future. This table will bear no golden crest, but its decisions will reach every cathedral. Will you take the seat your father once refused, not out of pride, but to honor those who never had one? Yours in faith, Pope Francis. Clara stared at the letter for a long time. The weight of it was crushing, empowering, terrifying. She looked around the trattoria. Lucia was flipping dough. Her mother was laughing with a customer. The table nearest her window still had the chipped corners she had bumped as a child. This was her world. But maybe her world had just grown. She didn't say yes. Not yet. Instead, she traveled. Quietly. Disguised in a scarf and sunglasses, like someone famous who didn't believe she should be. She visited a shelter in Palermo, where she cooked pasta for 50 homeless teens who called her Mama Clara. She spent a night with a group of undocumented workers in Milan, sleeping on cold concrete with nothing but cardboard under their backs. She wrote it all down, in the same worn notebook her father had once scribbled his kitchen recipes into. And finally, one evening, standing by the same fountain where she'd once sat crying outside the Pope's inauguration, she returned to the Vatican. This time, the gates opened before she reached them. The Pope, friar now, greeted her with a tired smile. Did you find your answer? He asked. Clara nodded. Yes, but not in palaces. I found it on the sidewalk. He gestured to the same simple room where they had first spoken. No throne here, he said. Just chairs. Shall we sit? But Clara didn't sit. She reached into her bag, pulled out the kitchen towel folded and preserved. I'll accept, she said, on one condition. The Pope raised a brow. Which is? No one sits at that table without stained hands. He smiled. A slow, genuine smile that reached past robes and titles, past bones and breath. Then I believe it will be the holiest table in Rome. Word spread quickly. The Council of the Unheard, they called it. Its members included a janitor from Argentina, a Syrian refugee, a nurse from Ghana, a blind teacher from Vietnam, and Clara, who chaired it quietly, always listening before speaking. They didn't make doctrine. They made decisions, real, human ones, about resource distribution, about dignity in labor, about listening first. And every meeting began the same way, with the placing of a single, threadbare towel in the center of the table. Servire est regner. To serve is to reign. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the infamous inauguration, Clara returned to the square. It was packed again, but different this time. Not a ceremony, a celebration. A long table stretched across the center, lined with chairs. Anyone could sit. Everyone was served the same bread, the same soup. No photographers, no fanfare. Clara stood at the end, apron on, ladling soup into bowls like she had so many times before. When a young boy asked, "Are you the woman who stood with the Pope?" she smiled. "I'm the woman who used to get kicked out," she said gently. "Now I make sure the doors stay open." That night, after the last bowl had been cleared and the last candle flickered out, Clara returned to the trattoria. She didn't announce anything, didn't seek applause. She sat at the last table, the one by the chipped corner, and pulled out her notebook. And in the softest of lights, she began writing a new chapter. Not about popes, not about palaces, but about what happens when a woman refuses to believe that being unseen means being unworthy. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Clara's incredible journey and the Pope's gesture? Do you believe true change comes from humble beginnings, just like Clara's story? Don't forget to mention your favorite moments from the story and the unforgettable characters, like Clara, the Pope, and her father, who all had their roles in making this journey so inspiring. We can't wait to hear from you.